These are the top 10 Jim Crow era hair products that black people used that sound too unreal to be true. And Scope News even added a bonus one to the list that sounds even more shocking. Now, imagine that it's the early 1960s, deep in the Jim Crow era. Segregation at that time was not just about where you could sit or live. It also dealt with how black people presented themselves. A black man walks into a barbershop, sits down, and asks for a perm. He's heard it's going to burn, but he doesn't care because this is what's in style. Everybody's wearing it, and he wants to look sharp for the ladies. The barber starts mixing the solution, and what's about to go on his head isn't something you'd expect in a barbershop. This was just one example of black people using products that were interesting and unique. They were not just regular products, they were very different and downright unbelievable. And when the products weren't there, when the tools didn't exist, Black Americans did what they have always done in this country. They made a way. Let's walk through them in order and with the real context behind each one. In 1911, a black newspaper called the Savannah Tribune printed something that tells you everything you need to know about the time. The paper described how black periodicals were flooded with hair-straightening advertisements. Not just a few, flooded. One of the names mentioned was Kink No More, a product that didn't even try to hide its purpose. It framed natural black hair as something that needed correction. That wasn't just marketing, that was messaging. And by the 1910s and 1920s, these products were circulating widely across black communities, especially in the South and in growing urban centers. Later accounts and historical records show that early hair straightening methods often involved homemade mixtures using harsh alkaline chemicals, sometimes combined with household ingredients, long before safer commercial relaxers became widely available. But even then, the exact formulas weren't always recorded. Some of this history survives through memory, not paperwork. At the same time, something else was happening, especially among black men. By the 1920s and stretching into the 1940s and 1950s, a hairstyle known as the conch became popular. And the process behind it is one of the clearest, most documented examples of how far people had to go. In the autobiography of Malcolm X, Malcolm gives a step-by-step account of how he straightened his hair in the early 1940s. He describes going to the store and buying Red Devil lye, a chemical meant for cleaning drains. That lye was mixed with sliced white potatoes to form a thick base. Then raw eggs were added to change the texture. Think about that for a second. Lye, potatoes, and eggs, all mixed together and applied directly to the scalp. Malcolm describes the burning, the waiting, the pain, and how people would coat their ears, neck, and forehead in petroleum jelly, Vaseline, just to protect their skin from the chemical damage. Whoever applied it wore rubber gloves, because even touching the mixture could cause burns. Again, another product that sounds so unbelievable. This wasn't secondhand storytelling. This was a first-hand testimony. And it tells you that what people now call style was often a calculated risk. Now step away from styling for a moment and look at health practices, because hair wasn't just about appearance. It was also about control. In the early 1900s, in places like New York City, school systems had official health protocols for lice. These were documented by the Department of Health and later preserved in historical accounts of school nursing programs from around 1903 to 1905. And what did they recommend? Saturating a child's head with a mixture of kerosene and sweet oil, which was typically olive oil. Then, to remove lice eggs, they instructed the use of hot vinegar. These weren't unofficial home remedies. They were in fact institutional practices of that era. And while they weren't written as race-specific policies, they existed in a segregated system, where black children were more likely to be subjected to harsh oversight and limited care options. So again, hair becomes something else, not just beauty, not just grooming, but discipline, surveillance, risk. Now fast forward a bit closer to the end of Jim Crow, into the late 1950s and early 1960s. This is where one of the most unexpected tools enters the story. The angel food cake cutter. Yes, a kitchen utensil. Hairstylist and inventor Willie L. Morrow, a major figure in black hair care, stated in interviews that barbers used angel food cake cutters the round, multi-blade tools designed to slice cake, as makeshift combs. The wide, evenly spaced metal prongs made it possible to lift and separate textured hair. Morrow described this as part of the early evolution of what would later become the Afro pick. This is one of the clearest examples of how everyday objects were repurposed into tools for black hair. Another hair tool was the heated butter knife. Yes, you heard that right, a hot butter knife. Modern black hair histories, including works like Tharp's Hair Story, describe women coating their hair with heavy greases, sometimes even cooking fats, and using heated butter knives as makeshift curling irons. The idea is that the knife would be heated over a flame and used to shape the hair. It sounds extreme and extremely dangerous, and it fits the pattern of improvisation seen throughout this era. Now here is the hidden secret bonus Jim Crow hair secret we did not want to leave out. There's one more practice that rarely gets mentioned. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, some black women used eating forks, actual dinner forks, to comb and shape their hair, sometimes heating them on the stove like a pressing tool. Others cut Prince Albert tobacco tins into strips, wrapped them in paper, and used them as curlers. Lard was added for shine and hold, while the paper absorbed the excess grease. But when you put all of this together, the lye, the kitchen ingredients, the kerosene, the improvised tools, you start to see the full picture. Black people always found a way out of nothing, so they built their own and made it work. From newspaper ads pushing transformation, to kitchen chemistry experiments, to official health practices that expose people to harsh substances, to barbers turning cake cutters into combs, every piece of this story points back to one thing. It was innovation under pressure. And the reality is, a lot of what is now considered normal in hair care didn't come from luxury. It came from making something out of nothing. Scope News tells the truth. Here are the facts. Historical references include early 20th century black newspapers such as the Savannah Tribune. First-hand testimony from the autobiography of Malcolm X documented New York City Department of Health school nursing protocols from the early 1900s and oral history accounts from hairstylist Willie L. Morrow, alongside secondary historical analyses such as Hair Story by Ayanna Bird and Lori Tharps. Legal disclaimer. This content is for educational, informational, and historical analysis purposes only. It is not intended to promote or encourage the use of any substances or practices described. Some historical accounts rely on oral histories, secondary sources, and reconstructed records, which may include limitations in verification. Viewer discretion is advised, especially when discussing practices involving hazardous materials or potentially harmful conditions.